You are ruining the aesthetic. Get out of the frame. My sister's voice cut through the coastal wind like a serrated knife. I stood frozen against the white stucco wall of the Azure Horizon Resort, clutching a clipboard to my chest. I was not wearing a bridesmaid dress. I was wearing a shapeless, slate-gray pantsuit, a uniform chosen specifically by the bride so I would blend into the concrete. "Emily, move!" Jessica screamed, gesturing at her phone where thousands of followers were watching. "You look like a stain. Go manage the caterers. You are aesthetic contamination." I did not argue. I did not cry. To my family, I wasn't a sister. I was just overhead cost. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I did not wipe my face. I did not apologize to the caterers. I simply unclipped the radio from my belt and set it on a passing tray of champagne flutes. It made a sharp clink that sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I turned my back on the white tents, the screaming bride, and the years of being the invisible engine that kept their lives running. I walked toward the service exit. My heels on the pavement clicked a rhythm. Done. 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 Miss Emily. The voice came from the shadows of the loading dock. I stopped. Leaning against the black sedan was a man who looked like he cost more than the entire wedding. Mr. James, my Aunt Elizabeth's attorney. I had not seen him in years, not since the family stopped inviting Aunt Elizabeth to events because she was too eccentric and embarrassing to their curated image. He did not offer sympathy. He offered me a heavy, velvet-lined case. "She wanted you to have this today," he said. "Specifically today." My hands were cold, but they did not shake. I opened the case. Inside sat a vintage tablet, the kind that was heavy and thick, its screen scuffed from use in her art studio. There was a single video file queued up. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. Aunt Elizabeth was sitting in her loft, paint on her nose, looking directly at the camera with that sharp, knowing gaze I missed so desperately. "Emily," she said, her voice raspy, "if you are watching this, I have shuffled off this mortal coil. And if Harold followed my instructions, you are currently hiding in a service corridor while your sister plays princess." She chuckled, but it turned into a cough that rattled through the speakers. "They think I'm destitute, darling. They think I'm a crazy old artist living in squalor. Let them think it. It kept the vultures away." She leaned closer to the lens, her eyes gleaming. "I am, or was, the sole owner of ePrime Holdings, tech patents, commercial real estate, and yes, the very ground you are standing on right now. It is all mine, and as of this morning, it is all yours." I froze. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I could not move. 100%. Assets valued at $16.8 million. No trustees, no conditions, just you. $16.8 million. The number did not feel like a lottery win. It felt like someone had handed me a loaded weapon. I looked up at Mr. James. He was not smiling. He was waiting for orders. "Is this real?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "It is entirely executed," he replied. "You are now the chairman of the board. The transfer was finalized at 9 this morning." The bass from the DJ booth vibrated against the service door, a dull thud, celebrating a marriage built on debt and appearances. I looked down at the tablet, at the frozen image of the aunt who had lived in a rundown studio to protect this secret. The gray suit I was wearing did not feel like a uniform anymore. It felt like camouflage. I wasn't the help. I was the owner, and the tenants were getting rowdy. I placed the headset on a passing tray of empty Oruve plates. It sat there next to a crumpled napkin, looking exactly like what it was. Trash I was done carrying. I walked straight to the valet stand. The attendant looked at my gray suit, then at the line of Bentleys and Porsches, and hesitated. "I'm not a guest," I said, my voice flat. "I'm the one leaving." He brought around my 10-year-old sedan. It rattled as I started the engine, a stark, rusty contrast to the gleaming fleet of the bridal party. I did not care. It was the only thing in this entire zip code that I actually owned. As I drove down the winding cliffside road, the silence of the car felt heavy, not empty. It was filled with ghosts. For years, I had convinced myself that my family's treatment of me was a result of my own failings. I wasn't pretty enough like Jessica. I wasn't successful enough like my father pretended to be. I was the spare part, the utility player. I remembered the summer I spent designing their backyard renovation. I drew the blueprints, sourced the materials, and spent weeks on my knees laying stone while they sipped iced tea on the porch. When the neighbors complimented the new terrace, my mother laughed and said, "Oh, we finally found a good contractor." She did not even point to me. I was standing right there, covered in dust. I thought about Jessica's first big brand deal. She could not read the contract. I spent 3 nights redlining it, negotiating better terms, and setting up her LLC. When the check came, she bought a designer bag and told me I wouldn't understand the fashion world. I paid my own tuition with student loans, while they leased luxury cars they could not afford. Why? The question had haunted me for a decade. Why was I the servant in my own bloodline? As the coastline blurred past my window, the answer finally clicked into place. It wasn't hatred. It was fear. My parents weren't cruel because they were powerful. They were cruel because they were hollow. They were drowning in a lifestyle they could not sustain, terrified of the financial abyss snapping at their heels. To keep the delusion of their own wealth alive, they needed a contrast. They needed someone to be the poor one, the help, the failure. They projected their own financial fragility onto Aunt Elizabeth and me. By treating Aunt Elizabeth like a destitute, crazy woman, they could feel sane and rich. By treating me like a servant, they could feel like masters. We were the props in their theater of security. They needed us beneath them to prove they were still on top. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. It was never about my competence. It was about their cognitive dissonance. They could not afford their life, so they spent my emotional currency instead. They treated me like a discount employee because it was the only way they could afford to feel expensive. I looked at the vintage tablet on the passenger seat. Aunt Elizabeth had seen it too. She had hidden her billions, not just to protect the money, but to protect herself from being consumed by their vacuum of need. She knew that if they saw her true worth, they would not love her. They would just eat her alive. I pulled over at a scenic overlook. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, violent and relentless. I wasn't sad anymore. I was calibrated. They had spent years trying to make me feel small so they could feel big. They had built their entire sense of self on the foundation that I was nothing. I picked up the tablet and scrolled through the asset list again. The house they lived in, the resort they were partying in, the loans they were ignoring. I wasn't nothing. I was the architect of their reality, and I was about to turn off the lights. The studio was located in the gritty heart of the arts district, sandwiched between a welding shop and a bakery. From the street, it looked like a derelict warehouse with peeling paint and barred windows, the perfect camouflage for a woman who wanted to be invisible. But when Mr. James keyed in the code and the heavy steel door hissed open, the illusion shattered. Inside, it was a fortress of glass, polished concrete, and mid-century modern furniture. This wasn't an artist's garret. It was a command center, a server room. The middle hummed softly in the back. A wall of monitors displayed real-time market data from 3 continents. This was where Aunt Elizabeth had built her empire, quietly outperforming the noisy, desperate men my father idolized. I sat in her leather EMS chair. It felt substantial, grounding. Mr. James placed a glass of water on the desk and stepped back into the shadows, giving me space. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It had been off for 3 hours. I pressed the power button. As the screen lit up, the device convulsed in my hand. It buzzed relentlessly, a physical manifestation of my family's rage. 47 missed calls, 82 text messages, 12 voicemails. I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold detachment of a structural engineer assessing a load-bearing failure. I pressed play on the first voicemail. "You selfish little." Jessica's voice was distorted by wind and what sounded like hyperventilation. The florist left because there was no one to sign the release forms. Do you know what that does to my timeline? You walked out because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention for 1 single day. You are ruining my aesthetic. Get back here and fix this, or so help me God. Emily. The message cut off. Not a single question about where I went. Not a single worry that I might have driven my car off the cliffside road. Just concern for the timeline, the aesthetic, the service I provided. Next came a text from my mother, Susan. "I always knew you were jealous of your sister, but this is a new low. Trying to sabotage her happiness because you can't find a husband. Pathetic. Don't bother coming to brunch tomorrow. We don't want your negativity." Jealousy. The lazy accusation of a woman who could not conceive of a world where marriage wasn't the only metric of value. Then the voicemail from my father, Robert. His voice was low, the tone he used when he wanted to sound like a titan of industry. "Emily, you have humiliated us in front of the damn investors. I don't know where you went, but don't bother coming back to the house. I am cutting you off. You hear me? No more help. You're on your own." I replayed that last part. I am cutting you off. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. He was threatening to cut me off financially while living in a house I had secretly refinanced for them, driving a car I had negotiated the lease on, and drinking wine at a wedding venue, owned by the woman he called crazy. He wasn't cutting me off. He was unknowingly severing his own lifeline. I set the phone down on the glass desk. The silence of the room rushed back in, heavy and expensive. Any lingering guilt I had, any tiny, pathetic hope that they might actually love me, evaporated. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a staff member. They wanted a punching bag to absorb their anxieties. They had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that they felt no remorse. They were incapable of it. I looked up at Mr. James. He was watching me with an expression that mirrored the late Aunt Elizabeth's, patient, expectant. "They're done," I said. My voice did not tremble. "Very good," Mr. James nodded, pulling a file from his briefcase. "Then I believe it is time for the board meeting." The boardroom was quiet, the only sound, the hum of the climate control system. At the long mahogany table sat the board of directors of E-Prime Holdings, 7 men and women in tailored suits, looking at me not with skepticism, but with readiness. They knew who I was. Aunt Elizabeth had prepared them. Mr. James stood at the head of the table and tapped the screen of the room's main monitor. "Before we proceed with the operational transition," he said, his voice grave, "the late chairwoman left a final message for the new CEO. It is classified as contextual strategy. The screen flickered and Aunt Elizabeth appeared again. She looked older in this video, more tired, but her eyes were still fierce. She was sitting in her garden, pruning a rose bush. "Emily," she began, cutting a dead branch with a sharp snip. "By now you have seen the Empire, and you are likely angry. You are wondering why I didn't step in sooner, why I let them treat you like a mule while I sat on a mountain of gold." She paused, looking directly into the lens. "I wanted to save you, darling, every single day. When your mother made you pay for your own prom dress, I wanted to write a check. When your father leased that ridiculous sports car while you were eating ramen, I wanted to buy you a house. But I knew something you didn't." She leaned forward. "Money without resilience is poison. If I had given you this empire when you were 20, they would have eaten you alive. Your father would have guilted you into investing in his schemes. Your sister would have drained you dry with her needs. You didn't have the armor yet." She gestured to the rose bush. "A gardener doesn't protect a sapling by putting it in a glass box. He lets it feel the wind. He lets it struggle for water, because that is how roots grow deep. I watched you, Emily. I watched you build your own life from nothing. I watched you learn to negotiate, to manage, to endure. I watched you become strong." Her voice softened, cracking slightly. "It broke my heart to stay silent, to be the crazy aunt in the attic while you suffered. But I knew I was pruning you for leadership. You are not inheriting this company because you are my niece. You are inheriting it because you are the only one who can survive it." The screen went black. The silence in the room was profound. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they did not fall. For years, I had thought Aunt Elizabeth was passive, a victim of her own eccentricity. I was wrong. She was a strategist. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been training me. She had let me struggle so I would not shatter. "She was right," I said quietly. The board members nodded. Mr. James cleared his throat. "The chairwoman's assessment of the hostile elements your family was also quite thorough, which brings us to the immediate agenda." He slid a file across the polished table. "Your family has filed a preliminary injunction. They are suing to freeze the assets, claiming undue influence and mental incompetence. They have hired a rather aggressive firm." I opened the file. It was a cease and desist letter, filled with accusations that I had manipulated a senile old woman. It was signed by my parents and Jessica. They were coming for everything. "They want to fight," I said, closing the folder. "They do," Mr. James agreed. "However, they are operating under a significant informational deficit." He pressed a button on the remote. A new document appeared on the main screen. It was a deed. "5 years ago," Mr. James explained, "your parents defaulted on their mortgage. They were days away from foreclosure. A shell company called Blue Heron Trust purchased the note from the bank and restructured the loan to keep them in their home. They believe they were saved by a benevolent, anonymous investor." He looked at me. "Blue Heron Trust is a wholly owned subsidiary of E-Prime Holdings. You are Blue Heron Trust." I stared at the screen. The house they lived in, the roof they slept under, I owned it. Mr. James clicked again. Another deed appeared. "The Azure Horizon Resort," he continued, "acquired by Epime 3 years ago as part of our hospitality portfolio. We lease it to the management company." I stood up, the realization hitting me like a physical wave. My family wasn't just suing an A's. They were suing their landlord. They were suing the bank that held their debt. They were suing the owner of the venue where they were currently trying to salvage a wedding. They had been living on my property, insulated by my aunt's money while treating me like a servant. And now, They were trying to bite the hand that had secretly been feeding them. "Mr. James," I said, my voice steady and cold, "schedule a meeting with the plaintiffs. Do not tell them I will be there. Tell them the chairman of the board wishes to discuss a settlement." "And the venue fees for the wedding?" he asked. The management company waived them as a family courtesy per your on-standing instruction. "Revoke it," I said retroactively. "They violated the conduct clause. Abuse of staff is grounds for termination of benefits." Mr. James allowed himself a small, shark-like smile. "Consider it done." The conference room door opened and my family walked in. They did not look scared. They looked annoyed, like they were inconvenienced by a meeting with a manager. My father, Robert, adjusted his tie, wearing the arrogance of a man who still believed he was the protagonist of the universe. My mother, Susan, refused to look around the room, clutching her purse as if the air in the arts district might stain her clothes. Jessica was last, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, radiating the energy of a celebrity who had been wronged by the paparazzi. Their lawyer, a man who smelled of hairspray and billable hours, slammed a briefcase onto the table. "We are not here to negotiate," he announced to Mr. James. "We are here to demand the immediate freezing of all assets pending a competency hearing. We also demand a settlement for the emotional distress caused to my client, the bride, on her wedding day." I watched them from the adjacent glass observation room. They had not seen me yet. They thought they were fighting a faceless corporation. I swiped my badge and walked into the room. The silence was instant and total. My mother gasped. Jessica lowered her sunglasses. My father stood up, his face weening. "Emily, what the hell are you doing here? Did you break in?" "Sit down," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The acoustics of the room carried authority. "This is a closed meeting for the Board of E-Prime," their lawyer sneered. "You are the defendant's niece. You have no standing." "Actually," Mr. James said, sliding a document across the table, "she is the chairman." My father looked at the document, then at me, then back at the document. The color drained from his face in a slow, satisfying gradient. You manipulated her," he stammered. "You tricked a sick old woman." "I was the only one who didn't trick her," I corrected. "I was the only one who didn't ask for a dime." I walked to the head of the table. "Let's discuss your assets, or rather, my assets." I projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. Item 1, the Azure Horizon Resort. The venue fee of $250,000 was waived as a courtesy by the previous owner. However, Clause 4B states that any abuse of venue staff voids all discounts. I looked at Jessica. "You screamed at me for 2 hours. You threw a clipboard at a caterer. You violated the conduct policy. The waiver is rescinded. You owe the full amount payable in 30 days. Jessica made us sound like a dying engine. "You can't. I don't have that money." Item 2, I continued, ignoring her. The residential property at 4 Private Drive. I clicked the remote. A copy of their mortgage appeared. "You are 6 months behind on payments. Blue Heron Trust has been lenient because Aunt Elizabeth had a soft spot for charity cases. I do not." My mother started to cry. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, designed to elicit guilt. I felt nothing. "We're your parents," she sobbed. "You can't evict us." "You evicted me," I said coldly. "You told me not to come back. You told me I was on my own. I am simply agreeing with you." I placed 2 envelopes on the mahogany table. One is an invoice for the wedding. The other is a notice of foreclosure. You have 90 days to vacate the premises. Jessica stood up, her hand slamming on the table. We are family. You are my sister. You are supposed to help me. I didn't blink. The structural integrity of her argument was non-existent. For 28 years, I wasn't your sister. I was your staff. I was your fixer. I was the help. You treated me like an employee you could abuse because you thought I had nowhere else to go. I leaned in close. Well, I'm not the help anymore, Jessica. I'm the boss, and you're fired. I turned to security. Escort them out. They did not scream as they left. They were too stunned. The reality of their new world, a world where I held the keys, had finally broken them. 6 months later, the noise was gone. My parents had moved into a 2-bedroom rental 3 towns over. Jessica's husband had filed for divorce the moment the debt became public. Turns out, his love was as conditional as my parents'. They posted on social media about my cruelty, but the engagement was low. The world had moved on. I stood in the center of a massive construction site in the middle of the city. The concrete had been torn up, exposing the rich, dark earth beneath. This wasn't another office tower. It was the Elizabeth Green Initiative. 12 acres of urban parkland, community gardens, and sustainable housing. I watched a crane lower a massive oak tree into place. I realized then that my victory wasn't in the boardroom. It wasn't in the look on my father's face when he realized he was homeless. That was just housekeeping. True justice isn't burning their house down. It is building a new one that they cannot enter. I had chosen not to spend my life guarding a fortress of resentment. I was planting a forest. I was defining my legacy not by who I destroyed, but by what I created. My revenge was a life so full, so green, and so vibrant that their absence wasn't a punishment. It was just peace. I took my phone out of my pocket. I scrolled to the contact group labeled Family. I hit delete. Then I turned it off, put it in my pocket, and walked into the garden I was building, leaving the gray suit and the ghosts behind me forever. If you ever had to build your own peace while everyone around you tried to tear it down, share this story. Let's remind the world that the strongest roots grow in silence.